Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. Welcome. So joining us today are our friends in the UT community, but also here in the audience are our friends at UT RGV, University of Florida, as well as Oklahoma State University. Thank you for joining us and welcome to the Texas Innovation Center. I also want to start off with thanking our production team, Ashley Jennings, Destin Douglas, Javier Multa Mena, and Robbie Shoemaker, who has made it possible for us to have this event today. All the slides and video recording will be shared with our attendees at the end of our program. So today's event, what I want you all to know is that it's more of a dialogue event. And so as Elisa is giving her presentation, please send in questions and we want to be answering them along the way. And so to give you a little bit background about how I know Elisa, I've been working with her since March on a project called the ABU. It's called the Automated Breathing Unit. And basically we designed this system in response to the ventilator shortage that was happening in March through the summer. And so as we know now, there's not a ventilator shortage anymore. And so our market has turned towards developing this particular automated breathing device to essentially hospitals and outlying hospital areas that have limited budgets. But the concept behind this is that our respiratory therapists or healthcare workers typically have to manually resuscitate patients, which, you know, if you're doing it for 15 or 20 minutes, it's not as manually taxing. But if you're resuscitating someone for hours on end, a device such as this becomes really useful. And so if you have this, it also plays into being able to put your patients in a life support system that bridges the gap for when you don't have a state-of-the-art ventilator in place. And so in rural hospitals, for instance, they typically have like 2 or 3 state-of-the-art ventilators, which usually cost about $15,000 to $25,000. So on the right-hand side is our ABU bridge ventilator, left-hand side. And so here is a video of what the ventilator operation looks like. And so you see the caster arm move up and down on the ambi bag, providing breaths to the patient. And so I'm not going to go over and through the description and benefits, but take my word on it. It's an amazing medical device, and it only costs about $1,800, extremely affordable. Everyone should have one. And so, you know, as I mentioned, we worked together on this system since March. And since March, we have designed 5 different prototypes of the ABU. You see 3 here. And then we've also done 4 different pig testing to validate the performance of the ABU and also to confirm that it is a safe system. We are 19 weeks into our FDA authorization process. And so what we're hoping is that by the end of the year, we will have our authorization and then be able to provide the system to the rest of the country and the world. And so to bring something like this together, it takes a lot of people. So this is a collaboration with UT Austin, UT Health San Antonio, Dell Medical School, Texas Health Catalyst. It took 22 very specialized team members to make this real, as you see here. So a wide number of engineers, mechanical, industrial, electrical, biomedical engineers, software, and an extensive clinical team, pulmonologists, respiratory care therapists, critical care specialists, as well as cardiologists. And then our regulatory team, and this is where Elisa comes in. She's been instrumental in providing as well as crafting our filing and helping us prepare the response for our reviewer. And really in preparing your filing and doing your response, what I have learned from this process is that it's an art. You have to be very thoughtful and careful in the language that you present. You have to be very clear in how you're providing the information to the FDA, because it could lead to all sorts of outcomes. And so today I want to introduce to you Elisa Maldonado-Holmertz. And Elisa comes to us from Ovalis Biotech Solutions, where she founded it in 2013 after her position as a VP in Emergo Group. Elisa is also a part of the board of directors for the Texas Medical Device Alliance, BioAustin, as well as FDA Medical Device Industry Coalition. And so at her company, what she does is she provides regulatory affairs as well as quality assurance support for startups. But most importantly, Elisa is a UT Longhorn alum. So hook 'em horns, and welcome, Elisa.
All right, well, thank you. Firstly, hello everyone, and thank you, Van, and the rest of the UT team. I would like to again reiterate that everyone who's online listening are welcome to submit any type of questions, and throughout the entire presentation, we'll take them all that we can and address them as we proceed through the presentation and thereafter. So my presentation is rather short, because I would like to open it up to further discussions thereafter for all of you who may have some curiosity on how to proceed with FDA in emergency use time and regular time as well. So today I want to also state that I'm only going to address issues regarding medical devices, and unfortunately not biologicals or biopharmaceuticals or pharmaceuticals. So next slide, please. So I need to start off from the foundation, the basics, is that the terminology used by FDA, what the definition of a medical device is, and I want to state that it's an instrument. We all agree it's some kind of instrument, a machine, an implant, an IVD, something to this effect that can either diagnose a disease, it can cure, it can mitigate, it can treat or prevent disease as well. And its intention is to affect the structure or function, and not through a chemical action. Otherwise, it would be a biologic or a biopharma. And I provide a link there. And again, as Van stated earlier, these slides will be available to you so that you have links to these resources. Next slide, please. I always include this in my presentations because folks forget that actually software only can be a medical device. So please remember that. So software is not only software or firmware within a medical device. It can be a standalone software, can be a medical device. So I always try to remind people of this. And then again, I have a reference there for you. Next slide, please. So, of course, our current situation with COVID-19 is that FDA has made an announcement that they are accepting applications for emergency use authorization of medical devices. And yes, they also have it for some pharma, biologics, vaccines, etc. But again, today we're focusing on medical devices. So next slide, please. So just to give you a little bit of background, though, in terms of medical devices, FDA, this is the list of current emergency use authorizations that FDA still has as valid. And so if you have any devices or, again, a device that will cure, mitigate, treat, prevent these specific items, again, we know about COVID-19, but we have anthrax, Ebola, enteroviruses, freeze-dried plasma, H7N9, MERS, nerve agents, Zika. You're able to pursue this opportunity through FDA. And why this is important to show this slide is to show you that even though we don't think of Ebola today as an emergency situation, FDA has maintained that this is still, they're still looking for solutions. And typically, EUAs, that's emergency use authorizations, do not expire very shortly. So it's a true opportunity if you're able to develop a device or a product that can meet these needs. And again, there is a link there. Next slide, please. So within COVID-19, our focus for additionally for today is that the devices that are qualifying are IVDs, in vitro diagnostics, high complexity molecular based tests, antibody tests, PPE, as we know, ventilators and ventilator type devices as ABU, as Van showed earlier, blood purification devices, renal replacement therapy and hemodialysis, decontamination systems, infusion pumps, wearable or remote patient monitoring devices, respiratory assist devices in any form or fashion. And then there's a category for other type of medical devices. If you can justify and provide rationale to FDA, why this would be essential during COVID or any of those other emergency use situations, then you're welcome to have dialogue with them on that. And then I included in there as well is there is, of course, drugs and biologics. And there are a couple links there as well for your reference. Next slide, please. Lastly, I include, these is just general, this is not specific for COVID or emergency use, but I have, oh, actually it is, this is the EUA resources. I have one more slide, but these are the EUA resources. These links are essential. They're essential if you want to work in this space. FDA has been extremely informative. They're providing all types of interaction. Daily, they update, almost daily, they update these sites with information. So they've been extremely helpful in providing information on emergency use authorization during COVID times. And again, there are these resources for your reference. Next slide, and I believe it's the last slide, are in general FDA resources. Again, FDA has evolved over time, where I would say starting maybe about 5 years ago, they've become more supportive of industry, supportive of trying to help the industry understand their situation and what they're wanting. So the first resource is the CDRH Learn. That's CDRH is for the medical device branch. They have all types of modules that are extremely helpful, informative on, what is a medical device? What are my first steps? How do you submit a 510K? How do you submit a PMA? So they have all kinds, how do you do electrical testing? How do you do biocompatibility testing? So they have all types of information there. To the on the top right, you have device advice. Again, all kinds of guidances, informational emails that have gone out. And then you have DICE. DICE is really great because in DICE, you are able to call at any time. And my recommendation in Central Time, if their hours are at 9 o'clock, if you call them at 8 o'clock in the morning, Texas time, you are going to be able to get a person, an FDA reviewer on the line. They may not know all the details about your product or that for that particular branch, but they'll usually provide a lot of guidance, and they'll be able to direct you to additional information. So that's a really great resource. If you want, one piece of advice I have there is that you don't ever have to say who you are, your company name or product name. So depending upon where you're at in your development, you don't have to provide that information at all. And then lastly, there's a medical device subscriptions. Again, get on there. They have tremendous lists, and tick off all those areas that you're interested in, and you'll typically, if not daily, for sure weekly, receive information on your specific therapeutic area or your type of device or some interest that you have regarding FDA. So it's an extremely useful resource. And with that, I believe that's my last slide.
So Elisa, thank you so much for giving that overview for us. We have some questions already.
Sure.
And one of the first questions is essentially like, what what is the first step to take with the FDA, in particular with filing for the emergency user authorization?
Yeah, so the first step is, the great thing is, again, FDA has been very receptive, very open. They have, on the links that I provide you for the FDA EUA resources, you can contact them just even with a query. So for example, I had a query yesterday whether they would allow a certain PCR platform as a comparator for an antigen test. I sent in a query, and within 2 days, I received a response, yes or no, or there was some discussion, some information. So first off, if you have just queries, you're able to send them in, and you get responses pretty promptly. But if you're ready to really start a dialogue with them, there's what's called the pre-EUA process, and that pre-EUA process is where you would, again, they have a pre-EUA email. And then you start submitting your information about, this is what I have, this is what I'm interested in, this is the type of testing that we are proposing, and then you start this dialogue with FDA. I have to tell you, though, that they have become inundated, and their priority right now is volume. So in your proposal, if you can indicate to them that you have a device that's going to treat a lot of patients, many patients at one time at a reasonable price, and you're able to produce them in volume, they take those as priority. So they're trying to obviously serve the public in the best form, in the best way possible. So again, pre-EUA is the way to go to initiate the discussion with them. And again, to your advantage, if you're able to produce something in volume or to have many touch points to many patients, they do prioritize that. So that's a bit of a tip to get prioritized. Okay,
wonderful. So one thing I want to mention is, Elisa showed a lot of web links, and all of these were and still are extremely helpful to myself because we're still going through the FDA EUA process. And there, you can find all the forms and templates for filling in the information that you need for filing. Right. And so there are many, many documents, but having regulatory specialists to work with really makes it less intimidating, which was what I found for my case. So the next question that we have is, have you ever worked with a company that tried to pass an at-home strep test or at-home flu test? Mm-hmm. So it's a two-part question. And then the second part is, why has the FDA been so resistant to at-home diagnostics such as strep or flu?
Yes, I hear you. I'm with you. FDA is very resistant. They're very resistant to home use for many items, many products. Yes, I experienced the same thing actually. So I think and even not only that, so they still have the mindset that they want everything centralized in a high complexity laboratory, a CLIA certified laboratory with expert certified laboratorians. And so it has been I agree with you, quite a challenge to even get FDA to accept point of care in a clinic, in a doctor's office, where you still have a healthcare professional. That is a challenge, believe it or not. That's called CLIA waiver. CLIA waive so that you're not in a, again, high complexity CLIA laboratory. And then you're saying, you want to take even the next step for home use. Yes, FDA has been quite resistant. Their concern is that the potential patient or user will not know how to use the product properly, the test properly. They won't know how to interpret the results properly, and they still oftentimes want to have some kind of physician oversight. So I do completely understand your question and where you're coming from, and we've seen the same thing. So what I would recommend as early as possible, my recommendation is to set up what's called a pre-sub with FDA, kind of like the pre-EUA. Well, if you're going through a regular non-EUA process, it would be called a pre-sub, where you submit to FDA a list of questions. Preferably you would send in your your testing protocols. That would be preferable with a list of questions, and your testing protocols would help FDA understand that you know what type of testing is going to be required in a home use setting to show that the subjects, the patients, will know how to use this product properly, and that you've mitigated all the risks that you possibly can. So I hope that was helpful. I just know that it is a challenge with FDA.
Okay, our next question, we've got quite a bit. So who manages the EUA Disease List? How is it maintained? And could you recommend to the FDA a disease to be considered?
Yeah, great questions. So there's also humanitarian device exemption as well. I'm not going to put a lot of time into that, but if you've identified some disease that's kind of like an orphan drug status, then you also can promote that to FDA, and with rationale, justification, numbers, etc., to get them to try to make a category for what's called human device HDE. But for EUA, so I think what they're looking for is, as you saw the previous list, I don't know if we can go back a couple slides where we are at, I think it's like slide 3 maybe. There is a list for Robert. I don't know if we can go back to maybe slide 3. If not, no worries. Forward. One more. Yeah. So these are the current EUA authorizations that are allowed. So it's basically based upon, a severity of an illness, how it would tax our healthcare systems, how many patients would be affected, and really like the severity of the illness and disease. Because, Ebola, obviously, we haven't had many cases in the US, but should it occur, and same with anthrax, but should it occur, it's really important that we are even ahead of the game. So I think if you look at those kind of factors, how many patients would it affect, how severe would be the conditions, how would it impact our healthcare systems, I think that would be a route for you to go.
Thank you. Our next question is, what are the key differences between a 510K and an EUA route?
Right, so that's a really good question, because FDA always encourages you, even if you go through the EUA route, they encourage you to eventually submit what's called a 510K for that device, but you don't necessarily have to, because most EUAs stay in place almost forever. But the difference is in the EUA process, FDA is willing to forgo some of the quality requirements and some of the regulatory requirements. So in a typical 510K submission, you must submit all of your performance testing, all of your like biocompatibility, electrical, software, mechanical, whatever applicable to your device, shipping, shelf life, etc., sterilization, packaging, all of that. You must submit all that, and you must identify a predicate device, a device that has the same intended use and similar technology. So the most important aspect here is the same intended use. Versus EUA, you don't have to have a predicate. You don't have to have a full quality system implemented, meaning that you have to just have bare bones. You're not going to probably be inspected. In terms of the testing, performance testing, they're not requiring all of the performance testing requirements. Though what I have been seeing as well now is that now that they're having enough products come through, they're giving sometimes authorization with post-authorization testing follow-up. So that's why you'll see, like almost every day, one of the tests, IVDs or molecular tests, is having an update of information because they had a post-authorization testing requirements. So I hope that was helpful.
Yes. So our next question is, do you have any tips on how to get any tips on how to start getting to grips with the enormous amount of acronyms used by FDA?
And yes, I try to too, and even in my presentation, I tried to spell things out, but I don't even know if FDA. I think I have actually seen on FDA, one of the FDA web pages, an acronyms list. But yes, there are a lot of acronyms, and just send me an email if you have a question. I think about that.
Yes, it was one of the things that I struggled with, because some of the acronyms actually, are misleading, because several acronyms are used for some of the same things. So also, any tips on how to, sorry, that we just went through that. So how do you know if the FDA has issued an EUA for a medical device?
Okay, so that's a great question, because I will tell you, most importantly, is if you're going to buy any hand sanitizer or any PPE or any IVD or any testing, yes, or serology testing, I highly recommend that you go to the EUA lists. I actually, on one of my slides, I provide these hyperlinks to you, these links to you to check them, because so when I'm working with clinics right now, and they're going to place an order for PPE, we go first to the FDA PPE list, and we make sure that they're on the list, because FDA is actually testing now. So FDA and CDC jointly are taking turns, and they're testing all types of serology testing, PPE, hand sanitizer, etc. And if they don't meet, they submitted data that could either have been, for some reason, for whatever reason, it doesn't, hold up during additional follow-up testing, FDA is removing them. So, great question. On one of the slides, I believe it was maybe a couple slides after what's on the screen now. There are, you go to those slides, those links. Yes, and you'll find us a PPE list. And gowns or shields or gloves or masks, whatever. And FDA has always, every day, they are updating those lists for what is a valid product. It's a great question.
Okay. Our next question is, what happens to authorized devices after the public health emergency is over? And so to my knowledge, the EUA is good through 2024. Is that right?
So yes, no, yes and no. So FDA tries to put a limit on the EUA authorization, like its lifespan. However, EUA authorizations, I think there's only 2 products that have ever been removed. So I don't want to mislead anybody. Always getting a 510K, submitting a 510K after EUA is the most prudent path to take to ensure and secure your commercialization pathway after an EUA, after an emergency. However, it is on public record. I'm on weekly phone calls with FDA, and it is in public record actually that they stated that only 2 products, not 2 categories, but only 2 products have ever been removed from EUA. So when EUA is still active, as they all are, for example, anthrax and Ebola and Zika, and they're all still active, MERS, you can continue with your commercialization.
The next question I have, I actually have a comment from the audience. Can you all hear my audio? I'm getting some feedback that it's distorted.
It is. It's rather, yes, it is distorted, Ben.
Okay. Is this better? Just if somebody kind of shoot a quick comment in the live chat.
No, at least for me, I still hear a lot of distortion.
Okay. Let's see.
I can I'll repeat the question. If I don't have a problem with my audio, I'll repeat your question, Van.
Okay. Ashley, are you on live? Okay. Well, let me just go to the next question.
Yeah, and I'll repeat.
Okay. What happens if you release a medical device without FDA approval?
Okay, so Van's question, I hope my audio is fine. What happens if you release a medical device without FDA approval? So, okay, so let's take during the EUA phase right now, and then we can take the other phase, non-EUA phase. So that in the EUA phase, FDA is actually allowing you to commercialize for at least 15 days before you submit your EUA application to them. Now, in reality, FDA has not been able to get to these EUA applications promptly because they're inundated, meaning that there are some companies that have been commercializing for several months now without FDA's EUA approval process. So the risk, I mean, the advantage is that means just get to market. You're, helping patients in the healthcare professional setting. However, the downside is if FDA gets finally to your application and doesn't agree with it, you would have to discontinue commercialization and to clarify and resolve all your issues with FDA, which is a disruption in your commercialization process or strategy. So you need to be a little careful with that, making certain that you have a really sound performance data. So that's during the EUA process. So again, FDA in the EUA process, they are allowing you to commercialize as long as you submit your EUA application within 15 days of your commercialization, and then wait them out until you get feedback from FDA on how, if they have any queries about your submission. During non-EUA times, that is actually illegal. So you must, as a medical device, based upon the definition that I gave you as the very first slide, is if you are some type of device, a device that mitigates, cures, prevents, treats an illness or a disease, if you are a medical device, you are under the jurisdiction of FDA, and you must adhere to those regulations, for which you must have a quality system, and you must have typically you must have a regulatory submission to them for their review. So I hope that was helpful. Next question.
Yes, and then something else that I wanted to add was that, and this is what I learned along the way, was that while you're filing for your FDA Emergency Use Authorization, you can't be, outselling your product. So that's something to keep in mind, and maybe Elisa, you can kind of expand on the reasoning behind that and what happens.
Right. So what Van said is that in non-EUA times, right, if you are while you submitted your application to FDA, your 510K, or you cannot commercialize until you get that approval, and then thereafter you actually have to register with them, and then you can start the commercialization process. And of course, it's that you have also implemented a quality system. Even if you're actually physically not manufacturing, you are required to have a quality system, because as the owner of the device, it is you who will be inspected by the FDA. I've received a note here that I will go ahead. I see some questions up, so I'll go ahead and ask it if that's okay, Van. So one of the questions is, how far along does your device need to be before engaging FDA to start the EUA effort? So FDA, you can start as early as possible dialoguing with them. Again, they have what's called a pre-EUA process. So you're welcome to start that dialogue as early as possible. The next question I had was, I have an early stage startup working with non-invasive technologies to predict embryo health. I have done animal studies with no regulation, and I'm actively working in that space, but moving towards human embryo testing. We have not tested on any human embryos to date, but have begun submitting NSF and NIH grants Do we need human data prior to submitting to the FDA, or should we begin this process now? This is really a great question because, believe it or not, and I think most of you are going to be very surprised at this, most medical devices, I would say like 98% of all device applications to FDA, 510K, let's say, this is for class 2 devices, do not require clinical trial data, does not require data in human subjects. And most people are shocked by that, and that's a fact. Now, when it comes to de novo, that means it's a novel device for which there is not another product on the market. You likely will be required to have some type of medical testing in humans. And for sure, if it's a class 3, I mean, we haven't discussed classifications, but if it's class 3, which is, a significant risk to the subject or to the patient, that's called a PMA submission. For sure, you will have to have clinical trial data there. So I don't know if I've answered your question completely, but what I would recommend is if there is another device similar to yours already on the market and already cleared by FDA, you have a predicate, you would check to see in their 510K submission, did they do clinical trials or not? You always mimic the testing. You always mimic the testing that your predicate conducted. If you are uncertain about this, again, I would proceed with what's called a pre-sub meeting with FDA, and that's where you have dialogue with them. And it's free of charge. Just be very mindful and thoughtful for your pre-sub submission. Usually a protocol, a testing protocol, and very specific sound questions to them. Okay. Let's see. Van, do you want to try your mic?
Yes. Can you all hear me now?
Better. Wonderful.
Okay. So our next question is, does a pre-release pilot test site at no charge to the test site compose commercialization? I'm not sure what your question is about. Could you clarify that? And then what we'll do is we'll loop back to you, please. So the next question is, can you forgo de novo with an EUA?
Oh, yeah. Good. Now I hear that. I hear echo. So that's a great question. In the EUA process, the FDA will accept novel submissions, but you'll be prepared for a lot of dialogue with them. But absolutely, that could be a strategy that was worth pursuing. Yes. So next question.
So the next question is, what information or data does the FDA expect for an EUA submission?
Yeah. So typically here, they require, you have to have your labeling. Labeling in FDA terminology is your labels on a package, on a device, and your operator's manual, or it's sometimes called instructions for use, IFU, or user manual, etc. That's required, absolutely required. And then there's a healthcare professional sheet that's required, and there's a patient sheet of information that's required. Your risk assessment is required, and then your performance testing, depending upon what type of device it is. So if it's an IVD, there's going to be, your flex testing is going to be your sensitivity, specificity, level of detection. I mean, there's a whole slew of, especially for IVDs, there's a whole slew of testing that you'll have to do. In 30 positives is what they're asking for today. Okay.
And so our next question is how do I submit a request for a new EUA? So if you have something already in process, how do you submit a new one, and would that be linked in some way?
No, if it's a different product, you can definitely do conduct the same process you did for the first submission. So I wonder if they were meaning like maybe a supplement to. So if it's a supplement to as well, if you already have a reviewer assigned to you, I would just continue that dialogue with that reviewer if you've made modifications. So I have one client, for example, where we submitted in, the FDA said, no, we want actually better performance. And so what we did is then we went back in discussion with FDA that we did an assessment of a design assessment of where we can make modifications and make improvements. We actually provided that back to FDA to show them that we made these modifications, and we then are in process of retesting the performance. So I think the next question then.
Sorry about that. So the next question is one that I constantly ask you, Elisa, is how long does it take to get an EUA approved?
So this is really difficult. At the very beginning, I can tell you, I would submit in and I would get, FDA was working around the clock. It'd be Friday night, 10:30 p.m. I'd get a response. Sunday morning at 6 a.m. I would get a response. They're not coming as quickly as that any longer in responses. I think, as I understand it from FDA, they are inundated with applications now. So there is, I really can't tell you. I do know this, is that they're committed to giving you, specifying your reviewer within 2 weeks. If you're submitting, let's say, a diagnostic. If there's another type of device that maybe there are not a lot of applications for, or it's novel or new, you'll probably have a higher success rate in getting it through if FDA really sees that there's a need. Otherwise, right now, they're saying that they want to be able to provide a reviewer within 2 weeks. And then they also prioritize, again, as mentioned earlier, those devices that will positively affect either healthcare professionals in the system, the hospital system or clinic system or some system, or if they cover more patients, and if you can also guarantee that you can produce in mass volume. These are getting higher priority, which means smaller companies, especially I support typically smaller companies, we actually have lower priority, unfortunately. And that's just the reality, and I can't give you the time frame, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you. I'll let you all know how long it takes us at some point. So as you know, we're 19 weeks into it, and we've had 3 interactive reviews so far with our reviewer. And when I say interactive, what that means is essentially we are communicating through email, attaching our data, and they're tracking our response that way, written. And I can also tell you that it doesn't, the FDA is very difficult to get to on the phone. So I have tried to stalk them to get a response. So just FYI. So our next question is a pre-release pilot test site required?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question. Yeah. Maybe we can follow up afterwards.
Yes. Let's move on to the next one. What is the approval process for a device that also utilizes a drug coding matrix or solution?
Yeah, that's a great question. So initially, unless you have a device that's very similar to you, to this, that you want to apply it to, you'll know what the regulatory pathway is. However, if it's something novel, you would most ideally start the discussion with FDA as it's called a determination pathway. So what that dialogue is Office of Determination, because they'll have to determine does this device, does this product have, is it more of a biological or biopharma product, or is it more of a device product? What is the primary mode of action? And so they'll either put you in, even though you have this this coding, they'll either put you as a medical device, or they could put you as biological, or they could put you as a pharmaceutical. Frankly, you want to stay as a medical device because the threshold is lower than a pharmaceutical. Or what they'll do is they'll say, okay, you are a medical device, but when we do the review, we're going to have a pharma representative on that review process as well.
Lisa, while my mic was not working, did you by any chance answer the early stage embryo?
I did.
Okay.
I did. But we missed, how should a startup pursue the FDA in terms of funding? Lots of investors are very against funding companies without anything from the FDA, but it seems to be difficult to get anything out of the FDA. Consultant and lengthy documentation. So I want to invent something and pass it through the FDA. What do you reckon a startup should do? So this is a really good question. I actually have recommendations for this, and I think it works really well. There's two things you can do to help with your investment discussions and getting something from FDA. So one, you can either hire a consultant, doesn't matter who, regulatory consultant who creates what's called a regulatory pathway document. It's a very formalized looking document. They've assessed, what are your regulatory pathway, what's your product code, regulation number, your predicates, your proposed testing requirements. Because once they know that, then they should be able to write out, well, it's going to cost you this much, it's going to take you this amount of time. So that's one route. Secondarily, you can submit what's called a 513G, 513G. A 513G through the FDA is a pretty easy process. It's a few $1,000s fee to the FDA as a small business, for which you have to apply for small business status, but it's a one piece of paper, one sheet of questions, and you have to put your IRS information. So you get small business status, and so it's a couple $1,000s for your fee for a 513G. You only have to submit a cover letter, what your intended use is for the device, short description on the technology, the product description, and then you submit this to FDA, and they make a determination. Okay, this device that you have is a Class 2 traditional 510K submission, or this is a Class 3 PMA submission, or this is a Class 2 de novo. So then you have it in hand to be able to utilize this with investors. The one note there is, if FDA, for example, comes back and says it's Class 3 PMA, and you're thinking, oh no, this is like, a 5 to 10 year process, and you don't want to go in that route. As soon as you change, for example, your intended use or indications for use or some function of your device, their determination will no longer be valid, meaning that you do have some room after that to make some changes, and that you don't have to pursue that pathway if you didn't want to. So you have regulatory pathway, informal with a consultant, regulatory consultant, or you have called the 513G process. So I hope that is helpful, but I'm always asked to do that a lot, and so that presentations can be put together and presented to investors.
Wonderful. So we don't have any additional questions now, but what I'm hoping is that everyone here today gets a better idea and gets their specific questions answered about the FDA EUA process. And as you can tell, there really isn't a specific approach to it because everyone's medical device situation is slightly different in terms of how to respond to the FDA. And hopefully, with the information that Elisa has provided through those web links, it'll help you start uncovering and demystifying the process. And those were really useful to me, mainly because what can be intimidating when you open those links is that the amount of documentation that is required as background reading. And so, for example, our EUA submission ended up being about 15 different documentation packages that are, very detailed in the results of the durability, performance, in terms of animal testing and outlining the quality systems. But I think, you have the basic structure to start now going and diving into the process. And of course, we are definitely here to help connect you to Elisa or anybody else that can help you in this process. So hopefully it won't be as daunting as you think it will be, because I've gone through it. So
can I add one more comment to Van's? Is yes, I think the biggest challenge is the documentation. That FDA is rather rigid, dogmatic, I don't know, whichever word you want to use, but they, in their mind, they have certain formats and expectations of what data should look like. So for example, they always expect to see a study protocol and a study report. And they even have a guidance on what they expect to see in those headers. You have to submit that template with those headers. They want to see acceptance criteria. They want to, so people oftentimes miss the acceptance criteria. They and just FDA, this is their requirement. So they're very rigid. And when it comes to software, know that there are 11. If you have software, if you have firmware, if you have an app, know that you have to submit 11 documents in a regular 510K submission just to support that software in your device. 11 documents are just for the software sections. There's 21 sections of a 510K. There are 11 documents for just software alone. So anyways, that's just some tidbits that I think that's the most shocking part for many people when they start on the route to working with FDA, that the rigidity and the requirements of the type of documentation and the quantity of documents that are required.
Okay, wonderful. And I want to thank everyone here today for joining us. And Elisa, thank you for sharing your time.
Can I just answer one last question? I'm sorry, Steve.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm sorry, but yes, the question is about $100,000. Can you get your product through in $100,000? And if you don't require clinical data, absolutely. I say that I feel really confident that if you had $100,000 for a medical device, for the testing requirements, consulting fees, FDA fees, testing at a third-party lab even, that would be sufficient. So I'll stop looking at the questions.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for coming. Thank you, Elisa. And I also want to welcome everyone to have a look on our website for our future events, and you are all welcome to attend them. Thank you so much and have a good week. Thank you.
Bye-bye.